Hi, welcome to the Unit 1 of the Module 2 of the course Issues in Bioethics. This particular lecture will deal with the ethical theories and bioethical issues. So, in a sense this is going to introduce the ethical theories and also briefly discuss the relevance of ethical theories in bioethics reflections. So, we will have to see how these ethical theories are going to be important or relevant when it comes to bioethical issues, because there is a problem. On the one hand, we know that theories have developed in philosophical traditions, in various philosophical traditions, which primarily deal with very abstract issues, conceptions of good, right, and these issues may not necessarily deal with practical considerations. And we have seen that in traditional ethical theories, this was a problem. There was always a gap existed between theory and practice. And one of the major criticism against some of the theoretical frameworks is that they are quite insensitive about what actually happens in the world when people do act, and how certain concrete ethical dilemmas can be resolved by using these theoretical frameworks. Whether they are practically viable, all such issues figure in. And on the other hand, we all know that the domain of bioethics is a very dynamic, very active domain. And physicians and patients and various other healthcare workers, they encounter issues which they have to resolve by taking into account several facts, several conditions about the concrete context in which such issues emerge. It is very difficult to arrive at solutions which are ready made. We have to take into account several factors in which a particular issue appears and then evaluate various factors and take decisions. So, in this context, how a highly theoretical, highly abstract theory is going to help for practical deliberations is a problem. This is where we can see that ethical theory deals with the principles of moral reasoning. How we can deal with, or rather we can go ahead with moral reasoning. Moral reasoning deals with what is right to know, to justify how a particular action can be justified as the right action, or why should we avoid certain courses of action on certain context. So, all these things is what ethical theories will normally deal with. And then, but when it comes to bioethics, as I mentioned, moral issues encountered in concrete context appears to be important, and it demands more practical approach, and physicians often wonder why do we need a theory. And it is also historically true that philosophical theories of ethics, or rather ethicists in the usual sense of the term, were never being consulted by physicians when they encountered ethical issues earlier. Even today it is, to some extent, it is a practice that they just think that it is their domain. Whatever issues they encounter, they will resolve it, and they think that they have the practical wisdom to do that, which is actually not correct, because we all know that ethical issues encountered in the practice of medicine are not medical issues per se. They are also social issues, and in that sense they need wider deliberations. Physicians who are experts in certain scientific domain are not experts to deal with such issues. So, we need to take inputs from various people, and of course from the ethicist as well. So, in that context we need a really broad approach when it comes to deliberating upon ethical theories that emerge in the practice of medicine. But at the same time, the question we have to answer is, how can a general theory help in reasoning concerning specific issues? Though ethical theory deals with reasoning, moral reasoning, here there is a specific issue, say for example abortion, and certain groups of people believe that abortion is wrong, and certain other groups believe that there is nothing wrong in abortion, women have the right to do that, and several other complicated issues that might arise. So, how can this general theoretical frameworks be of help for a physician or a practitioner or an ethicist in this context is a question. Again, when you approach, okay, let us accept that ethical theory is going to give us a lot of insight about how to go about, that is fine. But then when you try to approach ethical theories, we find that there is a multitude of theories. It is not that there is only one theory, there are several theoretical frameworks, though for our convenience sake in this course we will be dealing only with a few ethical frameworks like deontologism, utilitarianism and all, but there are a number of many other ethical theoretical frameworks that exist in different cultures, different intellectual and philosophical traditions. So, which theory is going to be actually helpful? This is a question which we have to deal with. So, there are multiple theories and many holding conflicting views. Say for instance, utilitarianism versus deontologism. Utilitarians would always argue that the consequences of an action is going to be deciding whether a particular action is right or wrong. But on the other hand, deontologism very clearly asserts that consequences have nothing to do when it comes to the moral worth or moral value of a particular action. So, when a physician takes a decision in a particular clinical context, whether he can adopt the utilitarian framework which emphasizes the consequences, or the deontological framework which underlines the duty aspect of physicians. So, this is something which we have to deal with, and we also find that theories often may not agree with each other. They disagree on very crucial points, and this again will cause a lot of issues, and the same issue may be viewed very differently by different theoretical frameworks. The issue which I have cited, abortion, that can have a different interpretations in different contexts. It calls for actually different interpretations in different contexts, because if you are a utilitarian, you look what will be the consequences, and the utility of the action is more important than anything else. But if you are a Christian, if you are a Catholic, if you believe in divine command theory, you will assert that it is wrong to abort. So, there are many such issues we can cite where conflicting opinions figure in, and the reason why we do not find a very clear cut guideline from the theoretical frameworks is that theoretical frameworks mostly deal with general themes and fundamental questions about the good, the right, and what qualifies human actions to comply to these features. They do not deal with very specific concrete issues. They are theories, that is why they are theories. So, why should a particular action be wrong or right may not be a direct concern of a theorist, ethical theorist. Rather, an ethical theorist would deal with all those conditions which make a particular action right or wrong. So, he or she is rather interested in seeing the conditions that make a particular action right or wrong. And bioethics deals with more practical issues in our rapidly changing societies, and how are ethical theories going to be useful. The issues which bioethics deal with are quite practical, quite concrete, and here we have the theoretical frameworks. Now, in this context, let us turn to one suggestion put forward by James Rahel. He suggests there are three models. Rahel suggests that there are three models which would be relevant when you consider the way in which how these two domains are related, the domain of theory and the domain of bioethics. The first one he calls the straightforward application model, where theoretical frameworks are directly applied. You apply theory directly to situations, to context where you encounter problems. But this may not work in all context, because as I mentioned, the actual context in which we encounter problems or dilemmas will be extremely complex and complicated, involving a lot of issues. So, a direct approach towards theory may not help you at all. See, you will ultimately get confused. In a particular context, if you try to apply different theoretical frameworks like relativism, divine command theory, subjectivism, or even utilitarianism, deontologism, virtue ethics, you will end up in a total confusion. You cannot say that any particular theoretical framework is going to be precisely useful for you to solve a particular problem, because there will be always another theoretical frameworks which would oppose that solution which you have cited, which you have come across. So, this model is of course, it is not completely irrelevant. The theoretical frameworks can be occasionally directly applied to cases, no doubt about it. For example, irrespective of the context, there are certain things which are expected from the physician. The physician has to protect the interest of the patient. But then when it comes to the question, what do you mean by interest of the patient? There again interpretations come in. Two physicians may have two different views about it. One physician may feel that I know the interest of the patient because I know his medical conditions better than he himself or anyone else. So, I will take the decision, whatever decision I take is going to be the right and better decision for him. Another physician might feel that though I am quite capable of understanding his medical situation, decision is going to be his, because he is the one who should have total control over his body, and he knows better than me what his welfare is, what his happiness is. So, I am only a facilitator, not a decision maker. So, two physicians might have very different views about what is ultimately the patient's welfare, though both of them are concerned about patient welfare and patient well-being. So, now you have another model which is the physics car mechanic model. So, what he says is that cars function on the basis of the laws of physics, no doubt about it, everyone knows it. But the mechanic as such may not know these laws, the mechanic may not be an expert in these laws, he or she might be knowing only certain very crude principles about it, how things work. See, there is a problem here, oh this problem could be because of the fuel tank issues or that issue. He may not be knowing the physics behind it, the exact theoretical reasons behind it, and the mechanic would be able to set the problem quite easily because of his experience without really knowing the theoretical aspect of it. So, this theory works in certain domains, even in medicine also it works, it has certain limited workability within the domain of the practice of medicine, but this is not going to work in all cases, this has got tremendous limitations. So, at some point of time physicians might need to know about the theoretical complexities as well. So, this model, though it is going to help a little bit, but it is not going to help completely. See, what happens is Rahel says that according to this model, the physics car mechanic model, the bioethicist will deal with certain mid-level principles, which are not really high-level principles. High-level principles are the domain of theory. So, he or she would be dealing with certain mid-level principles, which are not highly theoretical, but at the same time which can be traced back to these high-level theoretical norms, and then deal with these mid-level principles, and on some occasions this work perfectly well, but on many occasions this may not work at all. Mid-level principles have to be justified by higher level principles in theory, and on several occasions we cannot avoid theory, it takes us back to theory quite frequently. Again he proposes another model which according to him is rather more suitable when it comes to bioethics, the biology medicine model, where you have a physician, and the physician is also a person who has reasonably good theoretical knowledge about biology and other things. He has reasonably good knowledge about the body, the human body, a theoretical knowledge as well. He is not a person with practical knowledge alone, he also has theoretical knowledge which helps him immensely in his practice. So, this model would be rather more appropriate when it comes to bioethics according to Rahels. Now, let us come back to the real issue, let us come back to the question of approaching theory. So, we are now trying to understand theory, and I am trying to adopt a bit of historical approach here. There is a reason for that, because I would also like the students to appreciate that every ethical theory is rooted in a particular history. So, when it comes to the beginning, when we try to understand historically how ethical theories have emerged, how ethics as a discipline has emerged, and how philosophers have actually started theorizing ethical deliberations, then we have to essentially go back to the Greek tradition in the Western world. The Greek ethics in the Homeric days, of course, is the beginnings, and the age of the city states which follows later, where we will find the sophists, who are the moving teachers who taught rhetorics along with ethical deliberations. So, the sophists have also questioned some of the beliefs and customs that existed in Greek those days, and they posed a very serious problem to people like Socrates and others. Socrates actually encounters the sophist. Most of his philosophical deliberations began as an encounter with the sophist, and Socrates eventually argued for certain firm foundation opposing the skepticism advocated by the sophist. So, the beginning, and then I use this word eudaimonic ethics to indicate a very broad framework of ethical theories, which I will not be discussing here. This eudaimonic ethics is quite teleological, which suggests that there is a purpose behind doing action. So, a person to be good, virtuous, there is a reason behind that. That person has a direct gain from being virtuous. So, you have to be ethical because you gain something by being ethical. And what is your gain? The concept of eudaimonia, which is clearly elaborated by Aristotle. Aristotle talks about a concept of eudaimonia which can be roughly translated as it is not happiness, but something like happiness or satisfaction which you derive from the totality of your life. So, this is the ultimate objective of a moral life, and this eudaimonia is something which is desirable. Since it is desirable, one should do things which would promote, which would generate eudaimonia, and an ethical living is something which results in eudaimonia. Again, the age followed by the Christian ethics. For almost 1000 years, the Catholic Church dominated the European continent, and the Christian Church, the Catholic Church had its own theories about ethics. Mostly it extrapolated the ethical theories developed by Aristotle. So, in this context we will use the word virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is a term which I am going to use in this lecture to indicate the concept of ethics promoted by Aristotle and many others, and also the modern some of the modern ethicists to argue for a kind of virtuous life which would consist in the totality of life of a person. So, we will come to that in detail slightly later. And then again, the Enlightenment age is another very significant era where ethics takes a very different turn. As many other concepts, the concepts in ethics also have undergone tremendous changes during this era. In this particular era, we have two very important schools of ethics: the deontologism, which was primarily advocated by Immanuel Kant, and the hedonistic schools, and particularly utilitarianism, which was advocated by people like Jamri Bentham and J.S. Mill. So, these two schools are very important ethical schools, theoretical schools, which we will be discussing in the following lectures. And now, when you talk about other approaches, which is not where I am not really following a historical chronology, I will be mentioning to certain other important approaches like the idea of evolutionary ethics, which became prominent with Charles Darwin's work on evolution, the idea of evolution. Then relativism, which is a very interesting and important theoretical approach in ethics, because no one can deny the fact that certain values, certain conceptions of value, good and right, are relative from to people and culture to culture. Then subjectivism. Subjectivism is a variant of relativism. Only thing is that it says that each individual subject is the standard. Then you have the natural law theories, which argue that nature, anything you find in nature is good, anything that is natural is also good. So, man has to go back to his nature in order to be good. And then the very important model, which is called the social contract theories. Contemporary political theory rely a lot on this conception of social contract, which was developed by empiricist philosophers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. And then the ethics of care, which is developed by the feminists, which we will be discussing much later. And as I mentioned, the reason why I am adopting a historical approach here to discuss the evolution of ethical theories is to understand the rootedness of these theories in human histories and specific social orders. We can see that certain ethical theory became important during a certain period in history because of certain reasons. Particularly deontologism and utilitarianism have become important during the Enlightenment, because Enlightenment is the era of individualism as well. So, individuals gain a lot of importance during that age, and deontologism is one theory which asserts the value of the individual. It says that every individual needs to be treated as an end in itself and never as a means to an end. In this way, such theories underline the importance of the individual. Again, we will be starting with virtue ethics. Virtue ethics emerged in the Greek civilization, and there are historical reasons for that. So, McIntyre, the famous ethicist, philosopher, he says that moral theories are embodied in and are partially constitutive of forms of social life. So, social life is extremely important. The social life, the context of social life where these theories emerged needs to be understood when we try to understand the history of ethics. And he again says that the moral concepts play different roles in different forms of social life. See, for example, the concept of justice the same concept appears in different cultural contexts, different civilizations. For instance, you have it, Plato discusses this concept elaborately, and then in Thomas Hobbes you will find again the concept of justice appears prominently, but these two philosophers have dealt with this concept in a very different ways. So, concepts also have different roles in different theoretical frameworks and also social context. And here, to understand the ethical values relevant for a profession, which we are precisely trying to do in these lecture series, we have to see the historical evolution of a profession through different historical social context. So, again, this is something which we have to keep in mind. We are talking about medicine as a profession, but medicine as a profession, though it has been a very old profession, has never been practiced in the same way throughout history. For instance, the physician of the Greek days is a very different individual compared to the physician of 21st century today. And the kind of expectations and social roles which we ascribe to a physician is also very different. Those days people definitely expected certain things from the physician, and the physician was expected to deliver certain functions without fail those days. And that is the reason why a certain kind of ethical philosophy or a ethical framework was there to support the image, the idea of a physician during those days. But in today's world, we have a different concept of a profession, a different idea of a physician. We do not expect certain things which we earlier expected from physicians in today's world. Instead, we have another set of expectations. So, naturally the role and the function of the physician also has undergone certain changes, though across the period there is some continuity, of course we can see. This is what I said, medicine in the ancient era, when you try to locate and understand how this was practiced in some of the ancient societies like ancient India or Greece or the Chinese society, and there we all know that the social context was very different, the social order was a very different kind that existed during those days. Particularly in India, if you examine, there is the concept of Vaidya Dharma. We believe that the Vaidya or the physician, he or she has to follow a set of norms, a set of principles based on the function he or she delivers in the society, and he or she is expected to cultivate certain virtues related to that roles which he or she delivers. That is why there is a role duty of physician. There is a particular role they played in the society, and depending on the nature of that role, there is a corresponding set of duties which physicians were expected to cultivate. And then similarly in the Homeric Greece, we will find that virtues are associated with the discharging of one's allotted social function. And the underlying assumption is that the mythological assertion of a cosmic order encompassing moral and natural orders was something which was so supreme during the Homeric days. This is an observation by McIntyre, which I think is quite applicable to ancient India as well, because in ancient India the Vedas also talk about something like a concept of Rita, which stands for the cosmic and the moral orders. The cosmic order, which encompasses the moral as well as the natural compartments of human reality. So, they cannot be distinguished one from the another. So, this was there, this totality of reality, the totality of life was one of the important features of those ancient days. And then again this order changed with the changes in social order. We can see that it is happening in the Greek world with the Persian invasions, then colonization, trade and travel, exposure to other different cultures and practices, etc. So, naturally this has exposed the Greek people to different practices, different customs and different conventions. Once you are exposed to different cultural context, or once you are exposed to different cultural practices and customs, naturally you might think, you might be skeptical about the validity of your own practices, because you see that others believe in another set of practices. How can you say that your set of practices are more important or valid or right compared to their practices? So, this has led to a kind of skepticism in the society, and the sophists represent this temperament that existed during those days. They raised several questions by questioning the validity of conventions, by questioning the very validity of morality as such. According to them, all morality is nothing but customary practices. Beyond that, there is no fundamentality about the validity of morals. And this created conceptually, intellectually and theoretically a chaotic situation, where you have to arrive at some set of values which you can assert are not merely customary and arbitrary. Some validity you have to give them. So, it is in this context we will find the emergence of virtue ethics, and this is one important ethical framework which we are going to discuss along with utilitarianism and deontologism in this lecture series, because of two reasons. One is his historical importance. This is one of those quite ancient ethical frameworks that have emerged in the European intellectual traditions, and we can also find very similar kind of ethical frameworks emerging in other civilizations as well. And the second reason is that somehow it is even today relevant, because virtue ethics talks about certain virtues which people need to cultivate, certain moral virtues naturally, and these moral virtues are even today very important. So, in that sense virtue ethics is one very important ethical theoretical framework. The central question which virtue ethics raises is, what kind of a person ought I to be? So, it is in this sense the framework of virtue ethics is characteristically different from other frameworks. And then again, how shall I be? What is the kind of personality I should have? What character? See, the concept of character is very important as far as virtue ethics is concerned. So, it is in this sense I said that somewhere you can find similarities between other traditions as well, because one concept which the Indian tradition has been emphasizing was the notion of swabhava. Swabhava is more or less can be translated as character. What sort of life should I lead? Again, who is a virtuous physician? These are some practical questions we can raise. So, it tries to give you an answer to this question, what sort of a life should I lead? By pointing out to certain moral ideals, it suggests that you can lead the life of this person. See, for instance, it points to people like great human ideals, heroes like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or Jesus Christ or some others, and argue that these people possess certain admirable features, admirable characteristic traits which is desirable to be cultivated in all of us. So, they are our moral heroes and their character traits are to be admired and cultivated. So, and again when you try to see the relevance of a virtue ethics framework in bioethics, it suggests a way in which you can be a virtuous physician. The focus is not on individual actions, but on the totality of character of a person. See, this is again a very interesting contribution of virtue ethics. Unlike many other theories which hardly deal with the character of the person, which refers to the totality of that person's being. Say for example, utilitarianism deliberates upon what makes an action right or good, and it says that it is the consequences. If the consequences are good, the action is good. The reference to the individual hardly exists there. It is about the action here, but for the virtue ethicist, the person who acts, a virtuous person, from a virtuous person you always expect only virtuous actions. He always performs the right things. Again, the character traits that make a person virtuous is underlined. So, this is the photograph of Dr. Sheikh Umar Khan, who was in news recently. He was a doctor, the Sierra Leone doctor, who was treating Ebola patients at a hospital in Kenema, who died aged 39 from the disease which he contracted from his patients. So, once the Ebola outbreak was there, Dr. Sheikh Umar Khan and others, they went to the site and tried to root out the disease. And the health minister of his country called him a national hero, because he laid down his life for others, for helping others. So, we should also recognize that 3 of the nurses also died of the same disease, not just one doctor. There are many other doctors also have laid down their lives, and again, what character traits make these people heroes? So, this is a question which we need to ask. What character traits of Dr. Sheikh Umar Khan makes him a national hero? Now, let us come to the relationship between virtue and character. We look for virtuous character traits, those can be admired, as I already mentioned, and they are not just intellectual. Aristotle underlines this fact. There is an important difference between intellectual virtues and moral virtues. See, in our day to day life also, in our contemporary life also, we make a distinction between good doctors and efficient doctors. See, an efficient doctor need not be a good doctor always. An efficient doctor can be really rude and also very greedy, but a good doctor may not be that efficient like him, but still will be very kind, very dedicated, very concerned about his patients. So, there is always a value given to the moral character of people even today. Now, the question is how to recognize a virtuous trait. This is a practical issue. What do you mean by virtue or a virtuous character trait? Because there again you can say that there are different frameworks possible, there are differences of opinions possible, different people may have different conceptions of what is good and what is virtuous. So, how can we recognize a virtuous trait? And virtues fall at a mean between more extreme character traits. This is what Aristotle says. Aristotle asks us to look for the mean, the golden mean between the extremes. He gives an example of courage and many other examples he cites. Courage is a virtue and it appears between rashness and cowardice. See, for instance, to jump from a huge building, a multi-storied building is not courage, it is foolishness or rashness. But at the same time, the other extreme is to be a coward about everything and anything. So, you have to maintain a balance somewhere in between and be reasonably courageous. If you are reasonably courageous by striking the golden mean, then it is a courage, then it is a moral virtue. So, now to the question how to recognize a virtuous trait. There is a little more elaborate answer Aristotle gives us. His concept of virtue is rooted in the idea of essential function of a thing. Anything will have an essential function. Say for example, the knife or a table or a pen. A good pen is something which writes well. A good knife is something which cuts well. So, everything in this world, every object in this world and living creature in this world will have an essential nature, and associated with that essential nature there is an essential function. So, there is a reference to the true nature of things which every object will have. Naturally, human beings also will have, and what is the true nature of human beings? Being rational, to be rational. So, Aristotle's famous definition of man, man is a rational animal. So, rationality is treated as one of the characteristic features of man, and this is what I said, we have to strike a golden mean between the extremes. And the moral behavior according to Aristotle is also to strike the golden mean, to act moderately, never to go to the extremes, and a virtuous action is appropriate to the particular situation. So, there is also a knowledge which you require about the context, about the situation in which you are acting. So, this is why the moral knowledge according to Aristotle is a kind of practical wisdom. So, Aristotle makes a distinction between theoretical knowledge, technical know-how and practical wisdom. And he says that theoretical knowledge, the kind of theoretical knowledge which we normally talk about when we talk about mathematics and all, that is theory, that is pure theory, which is hardly going to be of any use when it comes to morality. Then technical know-how, when you are engaged in engineering, there is this technical know-how you have, which is also not of much use when it comes to morality. But what characterizes moral knowledge or morality is the practical wisdom of the actor who knows what is appropriate to the particular situations. And this is practical knowledge, and it is the balancing of the two extremes of excess and deficiency, and it is not necessarily an attribute of exceptional people like Gandhi and Jesus. See, this is very important. For Aristotle, or in the Greek sense of the term, virtue is not something which is which can be found only in exceptional people like Gandhi or Jesus or Muhammad or some great human being like this, who are really extraordinary and exceptional. They could be found in ordinary men as well. Only thing is that you have to cultivate them. So, Aristotle was emphasizing on the fact that you need to cultivate them. We might not have been born as naturally as a virtuous person. We need to cultivate these traits, these characteristic traits. See, in what sense we can find virtue ethics or virtue ethical framework relevant in today's world. We can start with the concept of human nature here again. Of course, we do not have to subscribe to an essentialistic conception of human nature which Aristotle did. We can have a rather more practical, moderate conception which Alastair Campbell writes in his book Bioethics, to see ethics as an expression of true humanity. Campbell says that we can see ethics as an expression of true humanity, and that is what he associates the conception of human nature with. You do not have to really go back to some metaphysical concept of human nature and try to understand what is, try to see what is this human essence and all that. We just have to avoid vices and cultivate those virtues that express this true humanity in all of us. And in bioethics, it describes the models of virtuous practitioners which others can emulate, like people like Umar Khan and the nurses and many others. You can give a lot of examples from every domain. In business, you can have a set of people who are like Steve Jobs and others whom we can try to emulate as far as their virtues are concerned. And in education, we have a lot of people. In politics, we have people like Kalam and others. So, we can emulate those people who are not godlike figures, who are not necessarily Mahatmas, but who are also people like us, but they have done great things, they have achieved great things. And what virtues different stakeholders can cultivate to make the profession more fruitful to humanity. This is where you have to, when you talk about the application of virtue ethics in today's world, we have to actually think of going beyond the domain of the practice of we have to actually try to see how this can be, how this will be relevant for other stakeholders, not just physicians, but other stakeholders in the context of healthcare practice, like other health workers, hospital administrators, even patients and other people. How to see disease as a process which you have to participate and try to avoid it or try to overcome it. How to lead a good life. All kinds of things will help you to understand disease in a better way, in a better light, and also make use of the profession more fruitfully to the betterment of humanity. But at the same time, we should also try to see the limitations. I have already talked to you about the advantages of virtue ethics to bioethics, which I repeat, views morality not as a matter of isolated choices made by people in different contexts. So, there is always a reference to a moral life as a whole. It is not just an action which you perform here or there, but your entire being comes into picture, and the whole being of a person comes into picture here, and more comprehensive view which takes into account all factors like individual, social, political, economic, etc. So, virtue ethics would definitely help us to arrive at such comprehensive frameworks. But at the same time, one can also point out some of the limitations of this virtue ethics framework. We should also we should also understand that there are certain limitations, like it can be too idealistic. One can always ask a question, can everyone be a moral ideal like Mahatma Gandhi? So, it is not actually possible to expect everybody to lead the life of a Mahatma or to lead the life of an ideal human being. So, then again several factors may influence a formation of character like upbringing, circumstances, etc. Like our childhood upbringing plays a very important role in forming our character. So, it is not that all virtuous characters can be later on cultivated by an individual. A huge quantity of our character traits are already being formed. There is an argument like that. So, how can you account for that? It does not accommodate different conceptions of good. That is another problem, because today we are living in a world where we do not subscribe to one account of what is virtue, what is good and all. There are different accounts of being virtuous and being good. So, which concept of goodness or which concept of virtue do you subscribe to? Often what happens is that one concept would necessarily treat the other as wrong and try to dominate that, try to correct that, and in that process can be even tyrannical. So, in what sense we can come up with a concept of good or right which would probably accommodate all different conceptions, which is a very practically difficult thing to attain, to achieve, and it fails to specific and concrete dilemmas we face in our life. These are some of the disadvantages of virtue ethics framework, and of course, when you discuss other frameworks, other more important frameworks in the coming lectures like deontologism and utilitarianism, we can see that it is not that one of the framework is going to be dominating in our discussions. Rather, we would be taking insights from all the frameworks. If virtue ethics is highlighting the importance of character, we are not saying that character alone is important in ethics, but the importance of character cannot be neglected. When it comes to a discussion on ethics, character is really important. But in what way you attribute, you consider its importance is a real question. So, right now we will wind up this lecture here, we will move on, and the next lecture will also discuss certain important ethical frameworks in this context, and present we will wind up. Thank you. Okay.